I am fascinated by Jesse Pinkman because he is the most tragic character I've ever seen on a show. Every time he gets so close to being happy, something happens to pull him back into anguish. Just like the time he finds love with Jane but she overdoses, he finds love again with Andrea but she dies, and worst of all, he escapes captivity but he's enslaved again by Todd Alquist. The more I immersed myself in the perpetual agony of Jesse, the more I realized that his story parallels the myth of Sisyphus. In Greek mythology, Sisyphus was a king condemned by Zeus to endlessly push this large rock to the top of a hill, and Zeus made it so that once Sisyphus neared the top of the hill, the rock would roll away and Sisyphus would have to go down the hill and start all over again, and this would go on for eternity. The French philosopher Albert Camus, in his most popular essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, insists that somehow, some way, happiness is possible in the face of Sisyphus' torment. Camus said, and I quote, "The struggle itself towards the heights suffices to fill a heart of man. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." The struggle itself towards Jesse's becoming was enough to make him feel fulfilled. One must imagine Jesse Pinkman happy. But how? To imagine such a man happy is to empathize with his suffering. September 24th, 1984, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Jesse is born into the upper middle class family of Adam and Diane Pinkman. He later attended J.P. Wine High School, studied chemistry under the tutelage of Walter White in his junior year, and struggled to graduate despite his poor academic standing. It's also during his time in high school that his parents kicked him out of their house. That's around the time he evolves into an oafish meth head with a penchant for saying bitch. Later in life, he'd find himself under the tutelage of Walter White, but this time, he's not learning chemistry. He's teaming up with Walt to manufacture chemically pure crystal methamphetamine.
This is art.
And in a year, they'd rise to become the biggest drug kingpins in New Mexico.
Cheers.
At first glance, it looks like Jesse is only a comic relief character, one present to distract us from the grim world of Breaking Bad. But as the story unfolds, we discover that his entire existence is defined by futile struggle.
Do it!
Not only does he lose his home and connection with his parents at such a young age, but he also has one of his best friends gunned down. Someone he loves dies partially because of him. He gets physically beaten multiple times, and the only people that he really has left in his life berate him and only talk to him when he's needed. When he eventually yearns for an escape from his life of crime and addiction, he finds himself repeatedly crushed by circumstance, the choices of others, and often by his own flawed decisions. Jesse's story points us to the absurdity of the myth of Sisyphus, which is the perpetuity of torment with no hope of an escape. A torment that lies not in the labor itself, but in the awareness of its futility. And the key to conjuring happiness in such a futile situation is hope. For where would Jesse's torture be indeed, if at every step the hope of happiness upheld him? And if the hope of happiness does uphold him like Camus suggests, would Jesse truly be happy? Or would the hope just be a tool he uses to endure his torment? "12 years ago, if you asked me what it means to be truly happy, I'd say true happiness is found in the absence of despair. But now, if you asked me, I'd tell you true happiness is still having the will to smile in the midst of despair. Either that or I'd politely tell you to f*** off because I have no idea what that word means, and I'm not the only one." For centuries, the concept of happiness has been a bone of contention for philosophers and psychologists. The Israeli psychologist Daniel Kahneman has defined happiness as what I experience here and now. The YouTuber Exobia, in his video Upsilon Dies Backwards, defines happiness as an unachievable myth peddled by those too afraid to admit the world's default state is misery. And that's perhaps the definition of happiness that I have related to the most. But the truth remains that, to date, there is no single universally accepted definition of happiness. It is just generally understood to be a state of mind characterized by positive emotions, a sense of purpose, and the feeling of fulfillment.
Ah oui, le bonheur. Eh bien, pour le bonheur aujourd'hui, c'est comme pour le crime de droit commun. N'avouez jamais. Ne dites pas comme ça, sans penser à mal, ingénument, je suis heureux. Car aussitôt, vous verriez autour de vous, sur des lèvres retroussées, votre condamnation.
In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus's exploration into the absurdity of happiness made me wonder if having hope is enough to be truly happy, despite carrying the load of existence. In his words, if this myth is tragic, that is because its hero is conscious. For where would Sisyphus' torture be indeed if at every step the hope of succeeding upheld him? In the same essay, Camus states, if the descent is thus sometimes performed in sorrow, it can also take place in joy. Camus imagines that Sisyphus has nothing else to worry about except getting the rock up the hill. He doesn't care that the rock rolls back down. He enjoys rolling that rock back up, knowing it will only roll back down. He chooses to be happy and not let the rock bother him. Jesse's fate is no less absurd, but it is tragic only at the rare moments when he refuses to accept his suffering. Jesse actively wants to save himself. He wants to save himself from the crime, from the drugs, from all the death and pain. And even when he falls, he stands up again because if he can't escape this life, he must at least try to thrive. Happiness be damned. If we traverse the spectrum and open our eyes to a dimension of happiness and suffering seldom explored, we'll find the dimension of absurdity that believes happiness and suffering must coexist to create this jigsaw puzzle called life. And even though happiness is an unachievable myth peddled by those too afraid to admit the world's default state is misery, the one place happiness abounds is in misery. We see this when Jesse is held hostage and forced to produce meth. Initially, he cries, and slowly, eventually, he comes to accept his fate like every other bad thing that has happened to him. He accepts it like he accepted the death of his lovers. He's fine with it like he was after he killed Gail. It is at this point, in that cage, that Jesse comes to that dark place where everything is futile. It is here that he fully embraces Camus' idea of the absurd man. The absurd man says yes, and his effort will henceforth be unceasing. If there is a personal fate, there is no higher density, or at least there is but one which he concludes is inevitable and despicable. For the rest, he knows himself to be the master of his days. Suffering and happiness can actually exist together, and the main way to find true happiness is to focus on the now. Enjoy the process of rolling that boulder up the hill. Who cares if life is meaningless? Who cares if the universe is indifferent to you? Embrace it. Own it. Just place your hands on that boulder and push. Don't obsess over what comes next. Push and revel in the moment. It's easier said than done, but trust me, it does get easier. In these subtle moments that Jesse glances backward over his life, he contemplates the series of unrelated actions which becomes his fate, created by him, combined under memory's eye. He remembers all he has lost, his parents, his friends, his worth, his self. Here, he grabs onto his own idea of hope. He chooses to embrace the purpose of his captors for him. He chooses to close his eyes to anything outside of that bunker. He moves the boulder. He pushes. He gets to the top, and when the thing rolls back down, he doesn't yell in frustration. He just goes down with a face that says, "This is my life now." And even when he gets his freedom, one can tell that the wounds don't close up. He is still on that hill, only now the gods have permitted him to stop and rest. He can now sit and look past the task of pushing, of suffering. He can imagine himself truly happy, and you should too.